Grace, peace, and welcome to Podcast of the Wills, a podcast that treats Star Wars like a sacred text. My name is Nick Milkey, and we are here. We're hanging out despite the fact that it's the end of the weekend, despite the fact that all my kids have to go to school tomorrow. For those of you that are watching in the house, sorry, school's coming tomorrow, whether you like it or not. I hope everybody's doing awesome this Sunday night. I hope you've had a good weekend. I hope you had a chance to rest, recharge, relax a little bit. And you're ready to settle in for a drink, for a great Star Wars conversation. That's something that we pride ourselves on here. We have amazing guests who tell awesome Star Wars stories, and we laugh along the way. We have fun along the way. We count down an amazing, crazy, different bunch of top 7 lists, and we're going to do that tonight. I'm actually really excited about this list. So as we jump in tonight, one quick tiny housekeeping deal. Let me get my screen share going on. I wasn't fully prepared here. Let's do a tab. Let's do this. Let's hit share. Let's see what happens. Okay, here we go. We have t-shirts. Nope, that's not a t-shirt. That's Adam Frazier. Hold on. There's the t-shirts. We have a TeePublic store. We have teepublic.com/users/WillsPod. You can get the Podcast of the Wills logo stuff. You can get the Dad Batch t-shirt. We just wrapped up the Bad Batch on Friday. I'm going to ask our guest his thoughts about that because I know he has some. But if you support our favorite 4 men and a little clone lady, we've got the Dad Batch t-shirt that you can grab. We have the Spark of Positivity t-shirt, which if you're any familiar at all with this show, with some of our other friends around the galaxy, Bombad Cast, we pride ourselves on saying, you know what, we're not going to be ugly in this fandom. We're going to have fun. We're going to laugh. We're going to have fun. So that hashtag Spark of Positivity t-shirt is up there. And then the other one that we have right now is our Heroes of the Mom CU. And that is not this podcast. But if you're a regular listener at all, or if you're new tonight, this is the podcast that I do with my wife and my 4 daughters, where we are watching all of the Marvel movies in chronological order because my wife has no idea about the MCU. And it's a lot of fun. Just last night, we watched Guardians of the Galaxy. That podcast is live now, most of the places you can find podcasts. And one of the big questions that came out of that was lots of stuff about Groot. She was really fascinated by the Tree Man and how sweet he was. So we would love for you to check out that podcast, get a t-shirt, join that in, and just hang out in that way. So that's not Star Wars, that's Marvel, but it's a lot of fun and I enjoy it. And I enjoy getting the chance to hang out with my family in that way. What is this camera thing? Let's fix that. Okay, better. But tonight we have an amazing guest, and I can't wait to get him in here. So we're going to jump right into that. My guest tonight writes for Slashfilm. He is an entertainment journalist. He has done a bunch of different things. He loves horror. He loves Star Wars. He has a lot of pop culture connections, and I'm not going to dig into all of them because he is the expert in who he is. But if you have hung out in any of the Star Wars podcast circles lately, then you know my guest, and it is my great thrill to welcome in Mr. Adam Frazier.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nick.
Dude, I'm so excited that you're here, and I have a very distracting background, so let me change that while I say thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for hanging out.
Yeah.
And
I also write for Slashfilm. So it's
that's right. And that's the one completely about the 80s movie Splash. That's all
correct.
They cover. There's nothing else there.
Yeah.
I think that was early Tom Hanks. So, anything about the movie Splash is found on Splashfilm. I do want to say this up front as well, and throw a little shout out / thank you to you. Adam writes a bunch of different things for Slashfilm. And one of those things that he does, and I think the recent one came out on Friday, he writes Star Wars bits. And every week there's Star Wars news, updates, all that fun kind of stuff. What's going on in the world of Star Wars, casting, episodes, just news and noteworthy things that happen in Star Wars. And one of the things that you usually include once a month is the podcast roundup. And we have been honored at Podcast of the Wills to be featured in several of those. So we can't thank you enough for including us in your podcast roundup. I think part of our play this month to have you on as a guest is that to guarantee a way to get into the next one. But even if we don't, it's a lot of fun to always be tagged in those and included in that. And we really appreciate it.
Yeah, that was something that when Slashfilm came to me and asked me if I wanted to sort of take over that column. But previously it focused a lot more on merchandise and kind of cool stuff you can buy. And I still try to feature that stuff. But I really wanted to focus on creator content and really highlight a lot of YouTubers and podcasters and stuff. So that's been my goal, is to highlight folks like you. So
that's awesome. Well, we love it. It's a big thrill for us because we are a very small show, but I love to say that we might be the smallest show that has the highest quality and caliber of guests. So we pride ourselves on being able to get in folks like you to have these fun conversations who are connected to not only, again, pop culture and entertainment and that kind of stuff, but certainly the Star Wars world, which is the one that we most normally, revolve in and circulate in. Before we get into more about your work, more about the things that you do, we have an important first step in the evening, which is our guest cocktail.
Yes.
I messaged you or emailed you earlier today. This has been a very busy weekend. My kids all go back to school tomorrow. My wife is in her second week as a school teacher, going back to work tomorrow. So we are in full on back to school mode. It's been a busy weekend, but the cocktail is still an important part of the show. So while we don't have anything fancy and lots of ingredients, what we do have is partially who I am as a consumer of spirits. But also what I wanted to kind of tie it to is you as a journalist. So what we have, and what I'm going to get up here on the screen, is tonight's cocktail, which is Adam's Just the Facts. And this is straight to the point. I have my glass tonight. It's my Han Solo Millennium Falcon TIE Fighter being chased, rocks glass. I have a big chunk of ice in it.
Excellent.
And what I'm going to put in it is some whiskey. It could be whiskey of your choice. It could be whiskey neat. It could be whiskey on the rocks. I'm a rocks guy. And what I have, and if you're a bourbon person, I recommend highly, this is Costco Kirkland.
Yes.
This is the Kirkland Bottled in Bond, which is made by Barton 1792. For any of you bourbon people out there, it's fantastic. This is like a $30 1 liter bottle of booze, and it's delicious. So I'm going to pour my Adam's Just the Facts, because a journalist gets right to the point. We're going to cut out all the nonsense, no spin. And if y'all are into the Costco bourbon, I also have the Costco small batch, which there's 3 of them. There's the small batch, the bottled in bond, and the single barrel. I haven't found the single barrel available at my Costco yet, but I know it's out there, and I'm not a bourbon collector per se, but I'm got my eyes peeled for that single barrel to complete this little collection. So we're keeping it, again, right to the point, right to the facts, and we're not going to put any spin in it. So I'm going to say cheers to you, my friend, and thank you for being here tonight.
I put Coke in mine, so I just went completely against the Just the Facts idea, but cheers.
But you know what? There's no shame in Podcast of the Wheels cocktails. You drink it how you like it. That's the way it works. So we've gotten that out of the way, and we're going to jump into talking about Adam. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll get to Star Wars in a minute, but give us a little bit of background on Adam, kind of your journey to your career in entertainment journalism and any of that kind of stuff. Tell us about you.
Well, so I was born in 1984, which is sort of an interesting time for Star Wars. I have an older sister, Crystal, who she really got me into Star Wars as a kid. She had some of the classic Kenner toys, and those were handed down to me. And so I had this really interesting adolescence where I grew up obsessed with Star Wars, but not really having anyone to talk to about it, because the movies had already came and gone. And I would just, I was just watching them on VHS. So I was into everything else that a kid was into in the mid to late 80s, He-Man and Ghostbusters and Ninja Turtles and all that stuff. But Star Wars was like this almost secret, like other kids my age weren't really talking about Star Wars up until the mid 90s when the Bindums came back
Okay.
and the Power of the Force and
Yep.
the special editions were re-released. And then it finally felt like, oh, okay, this is like a worldwide phenomenon and everybody knows about Star Wars. And like I now can talk about it to other people and they know what I'm talking about. So, but I fell in love with those movies at a very early age. And I grew up in a very small Appalachian town in Virginia.
Okay.
And so I really connected with Luke as a character, kind of growing up in this, what I perceive to be a dead end town, on the edge of space, and nothing important ever really happens
Sure.
there. And that sort of call to adventure, I spent a lot of my adolescence wondering, what I would do when I left, if I ever got out, essentially.
Right.
So, Star Wars really made an impression on me at an early age. And then that really started my love of movies in general, just the movie magic of it. I really became obsessed with, as part of those VHS tapes, I had the from Star Wars to Jedi, the making of a saga. And I must have watched that hundreds of times. I mean, I can quote all the people from making making a saga, backwards and forwards, like the little guy in Jabba's tail and stuff. But so I really became obsessed with the process of making movies. And there's this guy George Lucas, and he created this like out of thin air. And there's people like Phil Tippett and Dennis Muren, all these people that make these creatures and stuff. And so at a very early age, I was obsessed with that sort of, monsters, creatures, stuff like that, which led to horror. And, I've fell in love with movies like Alien and RoboCop and Terminator. I saw all those movies, way too young, which,
yes,
is the best time to see them because they make the biggest impression on you.
That's absolutely correct.
And, it's interesting as far as me getting into writing, because again, when I grew up, my only interaction with Star Wars outside of being able to watch the movies was playing with the toys. And so just creating stories all day with those toys and creating your own adventures. And, if you had a Boba Fett figure, I mean, that's a whole day right there. You can just come up with all kinds of crazy stuff. So, that really segued into an interest in writing stories and things like that. And I went to school for journalism. I tried my hand at being a journalist straight up, but that I wasn't really too interested in covering restaurant openings, which was I interned at a local paper, and I covered restaurants and stuff, and it was fine. But I quickly realized that like the life of a journalist per se wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I enjoyed writing, but I maybe didn't enjoy the working in that field per se. So my day job is in marketing, and I have freelanced on the side for about 15 years now, writing about movies, and member of a couple of film critics associations. I attend press screenings and stuff like that. So it's something I enjoy doing.
That's fantastic. Well, and I love following you on Twitter and have for a while now. And I love seeing and almost living vicariously through the things I see. Like, there's a fairly regular Adam Frazier tweet that will go out that says the press invite for such and such just hit my inbox, or the press invite for such and such, or even more recently, you've seen the first 3 episodes of What If, and you got the first one, which we've all seen now, which I really think was so much fun and so good. And I can't wait to see more. And so to see those little tidbits from people that I follow, and again, live vicariously through, oh, he knows what's coming and he says it's good, I'm going to keep paying attention. And like that helps people. That really does. Yeah. It helps drive us a little bit more to go, ooh, somebody's got an early peek and they say it's worth watching. Let's do that. You've got, like you said, you get press screenings, you get the opportunity to see some of these things ahead of time and write about it. What I want to dig into for a second is, you mentioned horror. You mentioned RoboCop, and I want to shout out to Michael from the Deucecast. Michael's in the live chat right now. I was on the Deuce Cast movie podcast earlier in the summer, and they were doing 5-year clips of best summer movies, 1985 to 1990, or, whatever it was. And the year that I was on and I got to be a part of that 5-year group, one of my choices was RoboCop. And like you, I'm pretty sure I saw RoboCop younger than I was supposed to, because that scene in the boardroom when Ed 209 takes out that whole room, like, that's intense.
Yeah.
And I'll buy that for $1. Like, that guy, like, he's hardcore. Like, there's a lot of stuff in that movie that for the age I was when I saw it, I was not old enough. Like, I shouldn't have seen that.
And I remember, and my mom is very much into horror and science fiction, and so I saw a lot of this stuff with her, or through her. And I remember, RoboCop. I had probably seen the commercials or something for it on TV, and like had begged to see it, because to me it looked like like a superhero movie. As a big dude in a metal suit like Iron Man or something. And I remember my mom renting it, and like right off the bat, I watched half the movie like this. Like, my mom's hand was like stuck in my face. Like, the whole scene where Murphy is killed. I mean, it's just so horrific.
Well, and it's Paul Verhoeven, right? So like, there's a lot of, like, of course it's going to be gory and intense and whatever. And I didn't know that then. I know that now, but
it's just so funny. It's like, I was like, okay, fine, just cover my eyes. Just tell me when he shows up in the robot suit, because that's
right. I just want to see the cool robot part.
Is Ed 209
that comes out of his leg? Yeah. Well, and that's interesting too, as you talk about like the horror stuff, and connect the connection with your mom, which I think is special, because like my dad was a sci-fi guy. He was big Star Trek and also Star Wars. So like, I grew up with original Star Trek, Next Generation, the original movies, all that kind of stuff. And I appreciate them, but I always gravitated more towards Star Wars. And it's pretty common that people are one or the other. You cannot, I don't dislike either one. Yeah. And honestly, I think I said this last week. I rewatched the first JJ Chris Pine Star Wars or Star Trek last week or the week before. It's really good. Like, I really like those reboots and those movies. I even like the one where Cumberbatch is Khan. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I like that movie. But I grew up with those. But what I want to dig into for a second is the horror piece, because that was not something that my parents, most of what we come across is what we get from our parents, whether it's music, whether it's TV. We didn't have tons of movie TV stuff, but like, we watched baseball as a family because we were from Illinois and we were Cardinals fans. We moved to Alabama, we became Braves fans. Like, that was our deal. But like, I grew up with the Eagles because of my parents. I grew up with Jim Croce because of my parents. Like, all these things that I come to. And so horror, which there's no judgment here, but that's a cool thing to get from your mom and to have that thing. My personal 2 cents on horror has always been, it was never my thing, because the cynic and the realist in me knew that it wasn't real. And so it was all like, I would watch these movies and go, I know that's fake. Like, it doesn't scare me, but I like suspense. Like, I like Get Out. I like The Exorcist. I like, there are things along Blair Witch. When Blair Witch came out when I was in college, like, that was a big deal. Like, that was fun. And I knew that was fake. And honestly, I went to watch it at like the midnight showing. When it was over, I wanted to go camping. Like, my friends were like, you're crazy. That's terrifying. I'm like, it's not real. Let's go camp. And they were like, no, let's not.
Right.
But like, so horror for me is a very interesting genre. And I would love to hear for you, not only from a fan, but also, you do cover these things. Like, talk to me about the appeal of horror, not because I'm judging, but because I would love to know more. And I've seen, Freddie, and, I've seen all the different movies. One of my best friends growing up, Lane, he was big into all that stuff. And I'd watch it with him and I'd just go, okay, fine, cool, let's go. Like, it didn't affect me, but tell me a little bit about your connections with horror, because that fascinates me.
Sure. So yeah, like I said, my mom is super into horror and science fiction, and is like a huge Stephen King fan. She has like every Stephen King book that he's ever written. And so I think that that early fascination actually with Star Wars, seeing the creatures and the monsters and being able to experience those things in an environment that was safe, really interested me in just overall that aspect of storytelling or movie making. And like you said, like, you couldn't get into horror because you knew it was fake. Like,
Sure.
I think that's horror sort of became a safe space for me because I also knew it was fake, and I was more interested in how did they make that happen? How
Mm-hmm.
did they make that look so real than being turned off by the fakeness of it? Like Alien and Aliens are two of my favorite movies of all time, and I just
Yes.
I love the production design and the sets and the creature effects and the cinematography and everything that goes into those movies, and they still hold up today because everything was done practically in camera. Someone was
Mm-hmm.
actually built it and actually shot it. And horror. I was really fascinated with Freddy Krueger as a kid, which is
Mm-hmm.
really odd when you consider
That
Freddy's whole deal. But I was just fascinated with I guess the amount of imagination on display in the horror
absolutely
genre overall. Um, Even if it's good or tons of horror movies come out every year. Some of them are fantastic. A lot of
correct.
them are middle of the road. Some of them are absolutely atrocious.
And
But
there's fun there too.
exactly, and I
Yes.
will sit down and gladly watch them because I'm at least seeing someone like thinking outside the box, and
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a total disaster or not, I think there's a level of ambition with horror and science fiction as speculative genres that sort of ask what if this happened that
Correct.
fascinate me. So a
It
movie
does.
like David Cronenberg's The Fly, like on the
Yes.
one hand it can be this very scary body horror movie with these crazy effects, but it also has a deeper level of meaning to it. And I think I get a level of like catharsis out of
Okay.
horror movies because
Sure.
like I find myself being a very anxious person, and
Okay.
being able to watch a horror movie is like giving yourself over to something for a couple of
Right.
hours and kind of losing yourself in it and getting
And maybe you come
some
out
sort
the
of
other side and go, well, I'm not in that situation. So at least this, I'm still fine.
right, exactly. And I think the scholar, the philosophical answer about why people like horror, I think, is so often that it's a way of dealing with death without directly having to confront it.
Okay.
And like I remember a quote from Stephen King where people asked him like, don't you have like terrible dreams? You must have terrible dreams from the stuff that you create. And he's like, no, I put it all on the page. And
Right. He leaves it
my
out on the field, as it were.
yeah. And so I think for me, it's a very healthy thing to
That's awesome.
to watch
No,
horror
I
movies.
love that. And I love looking at it in that way. And I've got a couple of comments from Michael on here that I do want to throw out because Michael hosts the Deuce Cast, which is a great movie podcast. His first question, he said, is Heels worth watching? Michael Waldron is the writer, and he's intrigued by that, which of course Michael Waldron was Loki. So do you have any insight into Heels?
Haven't started Heels yet. I definitely plan on watching it soon because I am also being from the South, grew up very much interested in professional wrestling as well, wrestling. So
Wrestling, that's right.
so I'm definitely gonna check it out. And yeah, Michael Waldron, like that guy has done so much. He did
Mm-hmm.
Loki. He's doing Doctor Strange 2. He's doing
Correct.
Heels,
Yeah,
and he's doing Kevin Feige's Star Wars project. So
correct. Yeah, there's a
this
lot there.
guy, yeah, he's doing
Yeah.
wrestling, Marvel, and Star Wars. Like he's like my
What
ideal
else do
writer.
you need?
Yeah.
Well, and his other comment, he said Cronenberg's son did Possessor last year. He said, heck of a movie. He said, I'll stop nerding out about movies now.
Yes,
Um,
Possessor was fantastic. It was one of my favorite movies of last year, and definitely another one where body horror, but also very cerebral and really digs into like a lot of themes and complex ideas about identity. And
mhm.
I just feel like for me personally, a movie is instantly better if it has a creature in
Sure. Oh,
it.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah,
as
yeah.
you were
I'm just
talking
more interested.
through, well,
Yeah.
and as you were talking about, some of your horror origins and connecting points, like, I'm of the age that I was not old enough to see Alien when Alien came out. And all I remember is that xenomorph busting through the middle of the guy on the deck of the thing. And I'm just like, I shouldn't be watching this. Like that was a big deal.
Yeah.
Or, of course, I remember the Carrie moment from Stephen King's Carrie. I remember, honestly, what was the one? Lost Boys. Lost Boys was one of those things like as a kid freaked me out more than now. I'm like, it's teenage vampires. Like, what are we talking about? But like
Right.
at the time, like I was just the right age. Was like, what is going on? Like it kind of freaked me out a little bit.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's for me the suspense part of it. I like it's the the straight up slasher horror part of it. But I'm also one to recognize whether it's Velocipaster or Toxic Avenger or
Yes.
there are any number of like this is bad and that's why we like it. I grew up with Revenge of the Ninja, American Ninja 2, like all the ninja movies, like that was its
Yes.
own weird version of like a horror thing, and it wasn't straight up horror.
I love Revenge of the Ninja. It's behind
Mm-hmm.
here. It's behind me
Yeah.
somewhere here. But yeah, like growing up like on TBS and stuff, they were always showing those kind of movies, like movies
Mm-hmm.
for guys who like movies or whatever
USA Up
whatever.
All Night, like
Yeah, yeah.
all those.
Revenge of the Ninja. I must have seen Bloodsport with Jean-Claude Van
Bloodsport
Damme
for
like
sure.
10 million
Yeah.
times. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really neat and it's really fascinating. Like I said, shout out to my buddy Lane. Lane was also a hardcore Stephen King guy, read all the Stephen King books, would watch, if they did any version of The Stand, he was going to watch it, like all those things. And so there were those moments, like if it was the weekend and I went to spend the night at his house, he was like, yeah, I'm going to watch. I'm like, okay. And like, I didn't have a phone to get distracted in, but I'm sure somewhere like I disappeared to pay, Super Nintendo or some other thing that, distracted me. But I have an appreciation for it. It's just one of those things that like, it's not my thing. So it's fascinating when I get a chance to hear from somebody else, what are the origins and where does it, shake out?
I'm a big Stephen King fan too, and I've read a lot of his books, but I haven't read all of them. And I actually just this year started. I'm reading the entire bibliography in chronological order.
Oh, wow!
So
that's fantastic.
Yeah. So like I said, my mom had a ton of the books already. I had some too. So I basically have all the books here now, and I've been going through them. I'm currently on Cujo, which is only like 1980. And so I've got a long way to go. A long way to go. But it's
you
been
do
great.
have a path in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. And so what that brings me to is kind of our next little pivot. And you mentioned it a little bit up front. Star Wars. You said you were born in 84. So you are even like me. Star Wars came out in 77. I was born in 78. Star Wars has always existed in your lifetime. We're not one of the ones that like, oh yeah, I was 10 and I got to see, Star Wars, which became New Hope. Like we've always had Star Wars and we've seen the ups and downs. You're of an age that you went through the quote unquote dark period.
Yes. The dark times were my time.
That's right. The dark times were your time. And like me, like I read a bunch of those EU books, the Thrawn trilogy, the Jedi Academy trilogy with Kip Duran. Like those were my prequels and sequels and all the things I had in junior high and high school. You talked about having an older sister, having the action figures and some of that kind of stuff. Tell us a little bit more about, kind of coming to Star Wars and maybe why it resonated so much with you, as a kid.
Yeah. Growing up in that era, and really just having the toys and not only that, but, not being able to go into a store and buy toys, necessarily. So I spent a lot of time as a kid. My parents are, they were sort of into antiquing and stuff at the time. And I tagged along on pretty much every trip to an auction or a flea market or a yard sale, anywhere I could go where I thought someone might be selling old Star Wars toys here. And so I spent a lot of time at things like that, getting toys and the read along books with the records and, anything I could find with Star Wars on it. And so I sort of still to this day treat those things as sort of artifacts. They're sort of like holy relics of a time that I wasn't there for, that I wish I was, but
absolutely.
So growing up in that time in the 90s and stuff, I have read the Thrawn books. I was super into the Dark Empire comics. and because I missed that first wave of toys and merchandising, you know, when the Power of the Force 2 line and all that stuff kicked up again, I mean, I was there. Like I had every single thing that came out. You know, if I had to drive an hour, 2 hours away to a Toys R Us or something, like we're going. Like you know what I mean?
It's gonna happen.
So I was just so into it. And again, it was the amount of possibilities that exist in that world for storytelling and in terms of play. You know, every time you got a new toy or a new vehicle or something, that just adds to the kind of stories that you can come up with. So that was really my gateway into Star Wars. And while I watched those movies just hundreds of times, you know, they just played on repeat basically while I would be playing and stuff. I feel like the toys really were one of my biggest access points for the franchise. But then, you know, with the prequels, I was in 8th grade, I think, when Phantom Menace came out, and my mom let me and a friend skip school, and she took us to the first screening opening day because, you know, again, I'm from a small town in Virginia. It was 1998. I don't, they might have did a midnight screening, but as a 13-year-old,
unlikely.
Yeah, even if there was one, there was no way I was going to get to go to it. So, but you know, we went the next morning at 10 a.m. or whatever time that screening was, and it was such an interesting thing because I liked it, but it was so different, you know, and trying to get my head around some of the new twists to the story, like Anakin building 3PO and stuff like that. I was like, what, really? Okay, well, that's interesting. And you know, then I grew with the prequels through high school, and you know, that's a very interesting time. That's a very interesting age to be when the prequels are coming out, because I feel like there was a certain amount of pressure there from the overall reaction to Phantom Menace. Whereas as an 8th grader, I thought, oh, this is really cool. I like this. But then, you know, everyone else was like, this is the worst movie ever made kind of thing. I'm like, well, I don't know. Is it?
How do you think that? Come on, man.
But, you know, and just to pull that out and break it down on its own, you know, I've went through what I imagine a lot of people have in my age range, where when the prequels came out, they weren't exactly what I wanted at the time.
Sure.
And I went through this kind of cycle of being an apologist for them and defending them, and then eventually deciding I don't really need to defend these movies, and going hand in hand with me also, you know, developing as this film studies person who was taking film classes and learning more about film itself and watching all these movies and developing new opinions and tastes, and, you know, actually sitting down and watching all of Kurosawa's movies and understanding, okay, Kurosawa influenced Star Wars, and, you know, you can see these connections and things like that. And then coming back around to the prequels and then sort of deciding, okay, I don't like these movies. And then the Clone Wars turning me around by adding more and more depth to those stories. And I'm to the point now where, you know, I'm a reformed prequelist. You know, I enjoy them. You know, I like them a lot, and I don't have time to. When someone wants to say, you know, oh, Jar Jar's terrible or the acting's bad, I'm just like, okay, it's fine. You know, I don't care.
Cool. It's not for you. Whatever.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yep.
So that's interesting, but yeah, it's always been part of my life, and I just can't imagine it not being. And there's a lot of other weird connections, like, you know, I feel like the idea that I watched these movies so many times as a kid, and I saw that opening scrawl over and over again, and this idea that I'm reading text before the movie on every movie, it like informed my brain in some way of like the importance of writing and how, you know, that can be something that I can do or be, you know, be interested in. And also just John Williams music. And I got really into, I was in band as a kid. So I was a band kid. And so I think that directly came from loving Star Wars music and wanting to play it. And luckily I had a band teacher who was also a Star Wars nerd. So we got to play Ewok Celebration and all kinds of stuff.
That's fantastic.
Band, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I agree with you completely. And, you know, just being a few years ahead of you, you know, same thing with the prequels. Like I came into the prequels and thought, oh yay, Star Wars. And then it showed up and I went, really? Is that the Star Wars? And I spent a little bit of time not being an a-hole about it, but like also being like, yeah, I don't really, that's not my Star Wars. My Star Wars is Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back and, you know,
Right.
whatever. But also as I get older, as I mature, and as I view the whole thing, and as I've spent time, the thing that I'm really interested in and intrigued by is storytelling. The concept of story, the concept of a story arc, all the like, I really do love the big main epic Star Wars saga. The first three, the middle three, the last three. Sure, there are parts that we all wish were different. We wish it was called a holocron and not a wayfinder. We wish that there were these little moments along the way, but I'm not going to be the guy that's going to take a dump on any of those movies because it's fun. It tells a story. There's arcs, there's completion. And, you know, this is a very unpopular thing, but Last Jedi may be my second, if not third favorite Star Wars movie, period. Like
Wow.
Empire, I'm the age that Empire is my number one. It's always going to
Yeah.
be my number one. Star Wars is right behind it because that was where it all started. That was the beginning. But Return of the Jedi and Last Jedi could swap back and forth depending on the day, depending on more nostalgia than anything else, because the meta narratives in Last Jedi that Rian Johnson told, to me, are George Lucas level Star Wars storytelling and the things that he was doing in those first couple of movies, whether it was talking about Vietnam, whether it was talking about capitalism, whether it was talking about whatever it was he was doing. But my whole thing is it's fun and it's movies that we're supposed to enjoy. And if this part isn't for you, pick another part. And so to come to what you said, talking about the prequels and connecting that to Clone Wars, like I think that's really interesting because I was not one who immediately gravitated to the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
Like I knew it existed. I was out of college. I had a job. I was an adult, quote unquote. I'm still quote unquote an adult. But like I didn't immediately gravitate to the Clone Wars. I went, oh, okay. And I'm sure part of it was like Snips and Sky Guy and that whole, you know, thing up front. But I am so crazy in the tank for Rebels that it's hard to put into words sometimes.
Yeah.
And being in love with Rebels the way I am made me go back to Clone Wars and follow the Mortis arc, the Darksaber arc, the different, and like, and now Bad Batch. Like, honestly, when Clone Wars season 7 came out, I was there for Ahsoka. I dealt with the Bad Batch part. I dealt with the Martez sisters part, but I was there for Ahsoka and Maul at the end.
Yeah.
When the first episode of Bad Batch dropped, I was fully in for all of it because partially I think those series have grown with the audience over time. We get a lot of heavy emotional themes as a parent. The Omega and Bad Batch stuff hits me in my feels. Like Hunter and Omega, like that's a dad and a daughter. Like that's real stuff for me. But all of that to say, there's so much of Star Wars that doesn't have to, if it's not for me, it might be for Adam. And if it's not for Adam, it might be for Pete, or it might be for Scotty, or it might be for whoever. And that's what I'm here for. And we're going to pivot in a minute to our top 7 list where we get into some of the crazier crap that's out there in Star Wars. But what I love is, and for me, like I said, as an adult and as I grow up, like I'm here for the storytelling, and storytelling is the part that drives it for me. Is there an episode of Rebels where it's just them moving crates around? Absolutely. Like that's fine. But then when we get beyond that episode, we have an amazing Jedi story, and we get things like World Between Worlds, which is kind of mind blowing. And you know, there's so much there that I love digging into and I love nerding out about with these moments when we get to say, oh, wow, there's so much more there than, oh, I wish it was this other way.
I think it's so interesting that Star Wars was really so heavily influenced by serials like Flash Gordon and things like that, and things that existed in a serialized format. And while, yes, that did carry over to the films, I think that the television format, the series format, really
So good for Star
lends
Wars.
itself to Star Wars. And I think a lot of people experience that. People who maybe didn't watch the animated series,
Right.
they experienced that firsthand with Mandalorian, and they were like, wow, I did not know that Star Wars could do this. Whereas people who watched the animated series were already very familiar with, wow, to see, you know, if one of your criticisms of the prequels was, well, we didn't really get to see Anakin and Obi-Wan as friends enough, you know, you get 7 seasons of Clone Wars to see that relationship, and it's great, you know? And so, yeah, that's what I love about the animated series. And it's funny whenever I see someone saying, you know, commenting that an episode is filler or something like that, I'm like, filler doesn't exist in Star Wars.
No, it doesn't.
I read Tales from Jabba's Palace. Okay, like I
Nope.
read a story about the Rancor Keeper. You know, there's no filler in Star Wars.
There's no filler, and especially, and of course, this is one of my favorites because I'll tweet it out there sometimes with a hashtag, and I know Pete from around the galaxy does it too. Especially in the Filoni era, Filoni doesn't do filler. Like,
it's
if there's an episode and you think it's something that's nothing, just wait, it's coming back. Like, there's going to be a frog lady, there's going to be a whatever it is, there's going to be something that pays it off down the line. And even I loved this, and this is not a huge moment, but it was one that stood out to me at the end of season 2 of Mandalorian. Of course, we get Boba back, and you know, there's that contentious moment in the tragedy when Boba's talking to Mando, and they're talking about the armor and the kind of the arguments, and he says, it's in my chain code, this was my whoever. Nobody knew what the hell a chain code was. Right. But then we get the first couple of episodes of Bad Batch, and we get the beginnings of the new Empire and the end of the Old Republic, and it's register for your chain code. Like, every bit of that, and Marvel does that a lot. And I think this is the Disney Marvel, overlap. We have an entire thing. I'm watching Marvel movies with my wife and my kids in chronological order. So we're getting it the way it was given to us. Or no, we're getting it the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
But when those movies came out in our real-time order, we got stuff all the time that we didn't know what the hell it was. And then the next movie, you're like, oh, that's where that comes from.
Exactly.
Like, that's such a Disney, Marvel, Star Wars storytelling. And I'm totally here for it. Like, I really like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the filler argument doesn't hold up really in any level.
For me, I know the sequel trilogy, like, man, opinions are just so varied on the sequel trilogy. I think more so than the prequels. It feels like for a lot of people, they either hate the prequels or love them. There's not really a lot of in between on the prequels, where it's like Attack of the Clones is great and the other two are absolute garbage. It's not that sort of approach with the prequels. But with the sequel trilogy, there's people that love The Force Awakens, don't like anything else. There's people that love The Last Jedi, don't like anything else. You know what I mean? And so it's really hard to navigate talking about the sequel trilogy with folks. I remember.
No doubt.
I actually had a job interview a couple of years ago where, they had looked at my film work or whatever. And they were like, so I got to ask you, what'd you think about Last Jedi? And I'm like, oh God, like this interview could go anywhere right now.
It's a left or right. There's no in between.
Exactly. But, for me, I really enjoyed The Rise of Skywalker. I don't think it's perfect.
Sure.
I think some stuff got switched around in reshoots that convoluted things a little. And I wish they maybe weren't so convoluted. However, like we're talking about, already we're seeing steps being put in place to flesh that stuff out, whether it be the sort of the clone stuff in Bad Batch or the sort of Snoke tank in Mandalorian. I think by the time we, a couple years from now, the breadcrumbs leading to Rise of Skywalker are going to be so much stronger. I think people are going to be able to appreciate that movie and that trilogy so much more. And I think, that's what Star Wars has really focused at doing for the last, I'd say 20 years. They pick a time in the timeline. They put a story there, and then they work out backwards and forwards from that story to connect it to something else. And that's just so interesting because not only right now are they building in between 6 and 7, but they've also introduced this High Republic era that is now bumping up against the prequels, and that upcoming Acolyte series is going to fit into that timeline. And so they're just constantly expanding the universe in really interesting ways.
Yeah, it is. And I feel like, and I've said this a bunch of times, and I'm not the first one to say this, but like we really are living in the golden era of Star Wars content, because just based on the things you've introduced, we've got High Republic, which Mark Thompson was on last week. And so he was kind of my final push to like, I finally started listening to the first High Republic book. Like I'm working my way through that. Like
cool.
I wasn't against it.
Yeah.
I just have a hard time finding time to read or listen because I listen to podcasts and all these other things. But like, I know I'm missing out on something. And every person that I hear that talks about how good the storytelling is, I'm like, crap, I need to get to that. Yeah. So we've got High Republic. We just finished up Bad Batch. We're about to come into Visions. We have Book of Boba Fett. We have Obi-Wan. We have Andor. Like there is so much stuff coming our way. And it's the golden era.
If you would have told 13-year-old me that we were getting a Book of Boba Fett series, I would have gave you a stone cold stunner, like right then and there.
Yeah.
Like, stop lying to me.
What are you talking about? What do you
that
mean?
Is so cruel to lie to me like that. But yeah, it's absolutely, I mean, and just selfishly for me, because I love Boba Fett, and he's always been a character that's just like really ignited my imagination in so many different ways. But so, I mean, just being able to get The Mandalorian and now Book of Boba Fett and this Obi-Wan series and,
Ahsoka series, like
Ahsoka series. I mean,
to be as in the tank for Rebels as I was.
Yeah.
A lot of, a decent part of that had to do with Ahsoka's arc in Rebels. And so, but to get the wrap up of Rebels, which essentially the Ahsoka series seems to be some version of the live action conclusion, because in Mandalorian, we get her saying, "Where's Grand Admiral Thrawn?" which means she's looking for Ezra, which means, all these different things. We get the Sabine casting rumors, which you were on, earlier this week.
Yeah.
I was one of the early ones to put out the Make Taya Sabine hashtag. And we would love to have Taya be Sabine, because I think it would fit. And I think it would be great to have her in there. We've gotten Katie as Bo-Katan. We've got some other things. I know that it doesn't seem like she's in the lead for that. That's kind of the outside runner.
Yeah.
But it ignites the imagination, and it ignites the opportunity for us as Star Wars fans to go, like you said earlier, what if? Not to borrow from Marvel, but like Star Wars what if is, what if we got Taya Sakar to be Sabine in at live action? Or what if we get, I was really excited for Raul Cooley to be Ezra in live action. That would have been fun because he seemed to want it, kind of like what's her name being Ahsoka. She was interested, she was game, Rosario was down for it, like she wanted it, and that makes it that much more fun.
The stuff with Tia is interesting because, I mean, I would love to see her as the character. I have nothing against her playing the role at all. But I feel like this is just complete speculation on my part. But, Tia is 39. She would be playing a character that's roughly 29, 30, I think, given the timeline of when Ahsoka would take place. And that's totally fine. You could do that, no problem. But I think the issue is they may have more plans for Sabine than just an appearance in this series. And I think they really want to focus on this era of the continuity. And so I think typically you just want to cast younger for that, because you want to have someone who can stay in the role for
you want to have runway
years.
For the future.
Yeah. And I think, I think that's mainly what it is, because let's say Tia does get cast as Sabine, and Ahsoka comes out in 2022, let's say. And so she's 40 playing a 30-year-old when that comes out. Well, that's great. But when they want to do Ahsoka season 2, or
5 years down the road, or 10 years down the road, right?
The
what
character,
does it look like then?
The character is still 30 and Tia's 45. And so, I just think that that's something that casting agents have to think about and consider when it comes to this sort of stuff. And it's really interesting too, they've really been 50-50 on who they cast and who they replace. When they replaced Ashley Eckstein, to me, it was like, well, all bets are off. If they're going to recast Ahsoka, but then to bring Katie Sackhoff back as
Right.
Bo-Katan, and then you hear that they're recasting Ezra, but that Lars Mikkelsen is maybe playing Thrawn again.
Thrawn. That's right. It's a
like
very
50-50.
and you were the one that tweeted that earlier, that it's a very 50-50 proposition, which kind of made me sit up in my chair a little bit straighter and go, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. And you're right. I do want to highlight, Michael put the tweet out here, and I don't know where the original thing came from, but he said, guess who dropped out of Powderpuff Girls? Wink, wink. So apparently Taya may have been connected to Powderpuff Girls and maybe is not now. I don't know what that all relates to. But again, I'd love that. I think you're right with the age thing. It makes it a little bit more of a challenge. You can age somebody down. They've done lots of magic in movie things.
Yeah.
But the thing that I would love to highlight is, like you said, that very 50-50 proposition of saying, we're going to go with Lars, we're going to go with so-and-so, but the other half of that.
And I know she has a very dedicated following, and I think she's great as the character. And it's just, it's hard to, for me, it's hard to get that wound up in the casting when this is Star Wars we're talking about, and iconic characters like Obi-Wan and Han Solo have been played by multiple people, and even Darth Vader, the most integral character of the entire saga, has been played by like 10 people, when you line them all up. So it's kind of hard to say that someone owns a character in Star Wars.
Absolutely.
I think all you could say is that George owned them, and now George doesn't even own them. So
he's not even there either. Yeah. And another great, kind of present day, Boba Fett, same thing. You have Jeremy Bullock, we have Mark Anthony Austin, which we don't have to get into, but like there's a lot of, all that kind of stuff. There have been plenty of people playing Boba Fett, but so I think what I'm going to go ahead.
I was just going to say Daniel Logan and Jason Wingreen, who did the original voice of Boba Fett, who,
that's right.
Even though I love the continuity of replacing his voice and having it be Jango's voice in the special editions and stuff, when I think of Boba Fett, I hear that original voice. It's just so menacing and sort of otherworldly. I mean, it could be anything under that helmet, but
speaking of things being anything under a helmet, I'm going to use that as our transition and our pivot into our top 7 list tonight, because Star Wars is nothing if not fully bought into a tinfoil hat, a crazy, hey, I heard this thing, whether it's the internet, YouTube, Twitter, wherever it is. So our top 7 list tonight, and I kind of threw this at Adam because I know he has covered a ton of different stories and he was game right away. So what we're going to do tonight is Adam's top 7 craziest Star Wars rumors, controversies, and theories. And we're going to start with his number 7. We're going to work our way, because we're all Star Wars fans. We've seen all the whole, they're going to reboot the sequel trilogy and they're going to cancel all of Star Wars and start over. And George Lucas is coming. Like, we've seen it all.
Yeah.
But as somebody who covers this, I want to dig into the things that you see, the things that kind of float to the top of your crazy radar, the thing of like, really? They think that's a thing? That's where we're going tonight. So we're going to jump right into your number 7, and it is Mick Jagger scoring The Empire Strikes Back. This is fantastic. Please tell me about this.
So this is one that, and nowadays when I go to toy shows or Comic Cons or things like that, I'm always digging through the boxes that have old editions of like Starlog magazine and Famous Monsters and stuff like that, because there's just so many articles in there that just seem entirely fabricated and like just complete speculation. And one of the weirdest rumors from the original trilogy era was that Mick Jagger was going to score The Empire Strikes Back instead of John Williams. And the crazy thing, just doing some research into this, it looks like the rumor actually began from a Hollywood trade. I'm not sure if it was Variety or the Hollywood Reporter, but it actually started in a trade newspaper that Jagger was on call to score the film, and then Starlog saw that and gave it traction by running with it, and it got to the point where Lucasfilm, had to release an official statement that was basically like, "No, Mick Jagger,
we're not doing that.
Mick Jagger's not involved with The Empire Strikes Back." So that's just a crazy thing on so many levels, because can you even imagine for a second anyone else doing Empire Strikes Back, but John Williams. Like, you know,
No,
I mean,
I can't imagine anyone doing Star Wars other than John Williams. And we've had some other great folks along the way, whether it's the Kiner brothers or, you know, whoever it is that has come in and managed to fill some of those in between shoes. But like John Williams is Star Wars. So yeah,
I mean, such a big part of Star Wars was that the return of the orchestral score, you know, in an era when electronic music and disco and popular music had really started to populate movie soundtracks more. And so the idea of going away from that orchestral sound to whatever Mick Jagger would possibly do with the Empire Strikes Back. I mean, we're talking about the Imperial March, the Dagobah, you know, Yoda's theme. I mean, like, it's just such an insane rumor that it's hard to believe anybody took it seriously for a second.
Yeah. And Michael says, who's going to ride your wild tauntauns? I'll see myself out. And yeah, you're right. And again, I'm a big fan of Michael Philip Jagger, the Rolling Stones, the whole deal. Like I'm there, but like, there's a part of me that goes, Mick Jagger's never seen Star Wars. Like, there's a part of me that goes, this isn't his deal. Like, right. I mean, even this picture that I selected randomly from a Google, like, this is not a man that's like, you know what? Let's do a space opera. That'd be fun. Yeah. That just doesn't add up for me. That's fantastic. And I should say, we put it in the category header at the beginning. Rumors, controversies, and theories. So we're going to kind of hit each of those categories as we go along. So that first one, number 7, was a rumor. And if I'm not mistaken, we're going to jump into number 6, which is also a rumor, which is Super Shadow. And this is a great one. And I really do want you to dig into this.
Man, because, okay, so you're born in 78. And so like me, I have to imagine that in those early days of the internet that you were on a lot of Star Wars websites, a lot of message boards, things like that. Yeah. And so I was on theforce.net. I was on, I believe there was a website that was just called like Naboo.net or something like that I frequented. But Super Shadow, oh man, he was a quote unquote insider who ran this website called Dark Side Prequel Rumors. And he claimed to essentially have a direct line to George Lucas. You know, as the years progressed, he would become like basically George's best friend and his closest collaborator, you know, like the way that he would talk. He would do these fake interviews with George. And it's just like, you know, it's just a level of fake news that's just unbelievable. But he claimed early on that he had a copy of the episode 1 treatment, which he said was going to be called Ways of the Force. He knew everything about the prequels. He knew everything about the unmade sequels, supposedly. And he was like perhaps my first brush with like the idea of fake news that like, oh, the internet, you can just literally make up anything you want.
You can say whatever you want and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And so he even managed to monetize this at one point, 2 decades before Patreon was a thing. He had these like tiered prices for his scoops that he was dealing out. And I was looking through some of the archived sites today and looking through things. And one of my favorite things was that after the release of Revenge of the Sith, he claimed that Lucas had entrusted him personally with the development and the writing of the sequel trilogy. And he went on to detail the perks and benefits associated with his employment at Lucasfilm. And I've got a list here of the perks and benefits. $43,577 per month. A 2006 Lincoln Navigator.
Ooh, that's big time.
8 weeks paid vacation, a house, full health benefits, a secretary and a personal assistant, paid gym dues, unlimited access to all Lucasfilm restaurants at no charge, and free use of the yacht and jet owned by Lucasfilm when the yacht and jet are not being used for official business. I mean, that is a good gig if you can get it.
It's good work if you can get it. Nobody's going to argue that.
But there's a great article out there from Thrillist that is sort of a recap of the Super Shadow moment in time, and definitely seek that out. I mean, that time was so crazy as a Star Wars fan. Just the amount of speculation and the expectations going on and the conversations in chat rooms and message boards. And another part of this outside of just Super Shadow himself. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the insane amount of rumors, Ain't It Cool News at the time, they confirmed unequivocally that Christopher Walken had landed the role of Darth Bane in episode 2. Which this was right around the time he was doing that Fatboy Slim music video where he was dancing.
That's right.
So it's like, that's insane to think about. And then there was
nobody's buying that.
Yeah. There's a rumor that Jet Li was going to play Boba Fett, which I just thought was hilarious. Like, I mean, yes, Boba Fett's badass, but I don't think he's doing like spin kicks.
And it feels like you're in that mode, like the 90s mode, where like, where are we plugging Jackie Chan into this? Like, it's the same level of like, he's the hot thing right now. So where is this going to go? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there was also rumors that characters like Thrawn and Prince Shizor were going to show up in Revenge of the Sith in various movies, and just so many wild things.
Yeah, it's so funny for that era, and I have to throw out there because it's such a wild story. Former guest of this podcast, Connor Ratliff. Connor is one of he's the George Lucas talk show, improv, worked on Chris Gethard, has done all these different things, and he plays George Lucas when they do George Lucas talk show.
Oh yeah.
Well, as a younger man trying to break into the business back in the day, doing improv, he was in acting. He has the great Dead Eyes is his podcast where he got fired from Band of Brothers, supposedly because Tom Hanks said he had dead eyes. And the podcast covers 2 seasons, and they're heading into a third about, did Tom Hanks really say that? What is the deal? But he tells this story, and he tells it in the Dead Eyes podcast, and I got him to tell it when he was on with us. When the prequels were coming out, literally as a joke and kind of as like a improv exercise, he created a website of Star Wars prequels rumors, and he named himself Ryan Johnson, Ryan Johnson.
Wow.
And so to come full circle as somebody who loves Star Wars and to have a Ryan Johnson in Star Wars in this whole thing, like, it's this really funny story of like, and he was like, I'm just making stuff up. Like, I was just out there because that was the era. And like you said, whether it's Super Shadow, whether it's Connor Ratliff doing it as a joke, like, it started to get traction and people reached out to him and were like, hey, we want to. And he was like, no, I'm just making stuff up. Like, it's not real. Right. And he knew that. But like, that era, again, early internet, super Wild West, as it were, like, it was kind of wide open.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, a lot of people, we still have people like that today, whether it's Mike Zero or Grace Randolph or any of these people that
Doomcock, you take your pick.
And it's just like, they are the new Super Shadows, but they're talking to an audience that by and large wasn't there for this. They weren't around for the round, the prequel speculation to experience it. But what a crazy time.
It's super crazy. And, we're going to get back to that here in a few minutes as we work our way through the list. But let's move to number 5. And your number 5 is David Prowse spoils Empire Strikes Back, which this is a great one.
This is a weird one because this is a story that I hesitate to call it an urban legend because it did happen. You're looking at the article itself, but in 1978, David Prowse did a personal appearance in Berkeley, California, which was covered by the local newspaper. And at that event, he fielded some questions about Star Wars 2 and Star Wars 3, which didn't, obviously have titles at the time. He just happened to mention in the process of answering questions that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father 2 years before Empire was released. Now, the interesting thing about this is if you've read the annotated screenplays and the making of Star Wars and any of the behind the scenes material, George Lucas may not have even decided that Vader was Anakin at this point. There's that weird middle ground where he was still really in developing the script of Empire with Lee Brackett. There were so many conversations about Luke's sister, Nelith, who came from another galaxy and all this stuff. So it's hard to believe that decision had already been made. And even if it had, would Prowse even have been privy to that knowledge? I mean, we're talking about when Irvin Kershner shot the film, when it came time to film that scene, the script called for Vader to tell Luke that Obi-Wan killed your father, and they dubbed the real reveal later. So it's such an interesting curiosity. Was David Prowse just he was a really good guesser, or what?
Was he drunk with the power of being Darth Vader? Like, what's going on here?
I mean, David Prowse has said a lot of crazy things over the years, but can you imagine like being at that event and he says that, and then you're in a theater 2 years later and you're like, oh, what the?
Oh, what? Come on, man. What are we doing here?
Yeah.
That's a hard one. And that's one. And for us, I think this one is so interesting because we're looking at it from the other side. Like we got, for the most part, we got the reveal, we got the Empire moment. And then we get, like you said, from Empire to, Star Wars to Jedi and the whole behind the scenes. And I'm like you, I'm such a sucker for behind the scenes production. How did they do it? How did this get made? Like all that stuff. And so for us, you're like, what a weird story. And like this one guy that maybe knew or maybe just decided to throw it out there and see what happened. Like either way, it might have been
like job security on his part,
Correct.
Because Vader just flies off at the end of Star Wars. And so, one could say, well,
yeah,
I guess we'll never see him again.
Is he floating it out there hoping that means somebody's going to hear it and bring him back? Well, Dave said it at a party, so I guess we got to bring him back.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be anywhere, but that is such a good controversial moment. And again, we were not old enough for that moment, but it was a deal at the time. And now it becomes a funny kind of niche part of all this story that we carry forward now.
Yeah.
So your number 4, another controversy, the original version of Rogue One. And this is a great one because we all remember we got a cut of the trailer, and then the movie we got left out a bunch of the things that were in that trailer.
Yeah. And it's a tough thing because even some of the stuff that was in that trailer was only shot for the trailer, which even complicates things further. But, the controversy here is that Tony Gilroy, who's a screenwriter and a filmmaker on his own right, he took over for Gareth Edwards during reshoots, and they did substantial reshoots on the movie. And depending on, who you believe, I mean, that story hasn't really fully been told, I think. And so there's some question of if it was purely a scheduling situation and Gareth couldn't do the reshoots, or if he was actually sort of locked out of reshoots. No one really knows. But the final cut of the movie, Jyn, K2SO, and Cassian get the Death Star plans from a tower on Scarif. And in the original cut of the movie, they were actually supposed to like get the data and run across the beach to get from one tower to like another kind of thing. It was very much, it was in the trailers. It was very much had that Saving Private Ryan vibe.
Correct.
Of storming the beach. And there were also earlier scenes with Darth Vader that in those trailers that suggested that he might be on the Death Star. And it seems that the sequence with him and Krennic may have originally taken place there and got switched around and ended up being on Mustafar. There's just so many changes from the script to production to the editing room. Jyn Erso started as a rebel officer, and the strike team, you've got the picture there, the strike team that was originally assembled to retrieve the plans included a couple of aliens. Including Lunak and Senna. And Senna became Senna is that big creature there, but Senna actually became Moroff, which is who is in the final film, the big white Yeti looking guy that you see in a couple scenes. And I love Rogue One, but I think a lot about the original cut of that movie and how it might have been for better or for worse. And, if you haven't looked at the art of Rogue One by Josh Cushins, there's a ton of concept art and a lot of like just broad sketches of what, ideas that they had for that movie. It's just so interesting. And I wish I understand why Disney isn't transparent about these things, but at the same time, it's weird because for us as fans, like you said, a lot of us love digging into the behind the scenes stories on this. But we've had the benefit of having so many people be able to candidly talk about the making of the original movies, because, George has had a lot of different stories that he's told along the way about the creation of these movies. And I always envisioned them as 12 films or 9 films or 3 films, or, you know what I mean? But there were a ton of collaborators there to say, oh, well, actually, here's the screenplays, here's the notes that, from the meeting with Lawrence Kasdan. So like, we've been able to put together a solid picture of the evolution of the story of those movies. Whereas the Disney era, I feel like so many people have left projects or things have changed along the way in reshoots that we might not ever get the full story of how these movies came along. I hope I'm wrong on that, but as it seems right now, a lot of people seem to have a lot of questions overall about the way certain ideas came in and out of the Disney movies.
That's right. Yeah, it's so interesting. And, like you said, we have so many moments, and like that trailer, one of the big things that everybody loses their mind over is Jen standing facing off against the TIE fighter on the top of that, tower. We have the shot where they're running across the beach. And for anybody like me who has a podcast, and we did every single trailer breakdown we could and spent an hour plus breaking down a 1.5-minute trailer, we're like, they're on the beach and she has the data thing in her hand as they're running. Like, we spent all of our time trying to figure out, wait, why didn't that happen? And
there was also that great shot of Krennic walking like on the beach, sort of surveying the damage, and his cape
in the water, the whole deal. Yeah, like there are all those moments. And I'm like you, like, I love that movie. Like, I love what we got out of that movie. I have no qualms, issues, problem. But like, there's that other part of me is like, what was the rest of it like? Or what was the other shot or the other cut or the other, whatever it was. And we're going to talk about that too when we get to Solo in a few minutes, because that's another one on the list where we have a change and we have a shift and a transition. But that's such an interesting thing, especially in the era that we're in. And I think it relates a lot to the sequel trilogy, which we've talked about. For the ups and downs that a lot of people find in the sequel trilogy, I think a lot of that stems from the inconsistency in directors, the transition from JJ to Ryan, back to JJ, who wasn't originally supposed to be the one to do it. Like, I would love, and I'm not mad at what I have. I love what I have, and I can find all the positives and things I love in it. But like, the idea of a Ryan helmed 3-movie sequel trilogy, or even a JJ 3-movie, like, the consistency of it makes a difference in what's going on.
And what's interesting is a lot of people say, well, the original movies weren't planned out, and they absolutely were not.
But, I mean, Luke and Leia are making out, for God's sakes. Like, we get it.
But you did have George there as the guiding force.
Right.
And, he was the one that ultimately made the decisions. He was hiring directors and writers to fulfill whatever his vision might have been. And I just think the sequel trilogy lacked that, and it's nothing against Kathleen Kennedy. I mean, she's an incredible producer, but she is not a creative director.
That's right.
Of Lucas.
And we've had that critique of George Lucas himself.
Yeah.
Like, to be the one who created this, and Han Solo or Harrison Ford said it himself. George, you can write this shit, but you can't say it. Like,
yeah, that's right.
That there's a part of George Lucas, and when you get to the prequels, and I think for a lot of us that grew up with the original trilogy, the prequels kind of laid bare George loose in a candy shop, George loose with all the technology, George saying, I have no constrictions whatsoever. I can do the things I want to do. But in the midst of that, like, George needed someone, whether it was Rick McCallum, whether it was somebody else, to rein him in a little bit and go, hey, that may be one too far. That may be one too, there's a lot to that doesn't make those movies bad and doesn't make the sequel trilogy movies bad. But there is something to be said for consistency. And I think what I love that we're seeing right now with Mandalorian, with Bad Batch, with these other movies, like, an overarching, whether it's an executive producer presence, whether it's
Yes. Yeah.
a Filoni, a Favreau, somebody who, I love the first season Mandalorian, the behind the scenes series where we got as many episodes of behind the scenes
Yes.
as we got Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Dave Filoni's the nerd at the table. He's the guy going, well, actually, this is why this is like this. And this is what, and John Favreau's going, cool. I know how to make that look good on screen. And I know how to, like, that team up is what makes Star Wars so good. So it doesn't have to be
Absolutely
just JJ, just Ryan.
Yeah. And I think that's a key point that I try to tell people about whenever discussion about the prequels happens, is that, Star Wars, those original movies, quite frankly, are miracles. I mean,
yes.
And really from my viewpoint as someone who watches hundreds and hundreds of movies every year and writes about them, every movie is a miracle, and a great movie is like beyond a miracle.
Right.
For a story, an idea to touch that many hands and go through so many changes and still come out on the other end as effective and potent as a story is really something. And George, while he is a genius and an innovator, he had a bunch of incredible collaborators during the original trilogy, whether it was Gary Kurtz or Lawrence Kasdan or Phil Tippett, all these people he worked with, Freeborn. I mean, just so many people at every step of the process. And in the prequel era, obviously there were people like John Knoll, who were there to help break barriers technologically, but I don't feel like he had that level of collaboration. And I really wish that he did, because I think he has great ideas and he understands the broad strokes of the stories that he's telling. But I think when it got down to writing those screenplays, he just, it's like, again, you mentioned, like Harrison said, like, George doesn't have any patience when it comes to the acting process,
Faster
like
and more intense. Let's
go.
Harrison
tells that story. Like George is like, it's on the paper, just do what it says, and Harrison's like trying to, like, draw out a performance or whatever. And I think, as a screenwriter, George sometimes doesn't have that patience. And so he has to write in these big, broad strokes. And I think some people want a little more nuance and a little more, connecting the dots of things. But bring that back to the sequel trilogy. Yes. I think when we look back on the sequel trilogy, even now, and more so in 5 years or 10 years, some of the decisions made on where to start that story, where to pick up the story at different places, I think a lot of the perceived problems of that trilogy could have been solved with maybe just a little more upfront thought, of adding consistency to it. So.
For sure. And we could do a whole show just about that, but we want to keep this moving. And I want to get us back into our top 7, because we have 3 more choices left. We have your number 3, which is another controversy thing, Lord and Miller and the firing from Solo, A Star Wars Story. This is a great one. And as I was doing the search for images and stuff to put up on the screen for the live stream, it's funny to me that we have this group shot. We have all, Lord and Miller with the cast. But then, what we see in our mind for the most part was Ron Howard, because, Lord and Miller started this whole deal, but then at some point Ron Howard came in and it became the Ron Howard thing. And that's not a judgment against him, but talk about this as your selection for number 3.
Yeah. I know a lot of people were really disappointed in this. And me personally, I'm happy with the way it turned out, but basically Phil Lord and Chris Miller were fired during production of Solo, and they were replaced with Ron Howard, who filmed essentially about 70% of the final feature. Apparently the reason that Lord and Miller were let go is that, they're known for comedies like 21 Jump Street and the Lego Movie, and they do a lot of improvisation. And apparently they had gone overboard with the improvisation, and they kept moving farther and farther away from what was on the page, the script that was written by Lawrence and Jake Kasdan. And, as a writer, you know, if I was Lawrence Kasdan, who I imagine must feel a tremendous ownership over the characterization of Han Solo. I mean, he did not write, obviously, the original Star Wars movie, but he took that character in different places in Empire and Jedi and really, I think, honed in on who Han is as a person.
He's been connected for so long.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, again, it's a script that he wrote with his son. And his son is such a hardcore Star Wars nerd. I mean, they worked in a Terrace Kasi reference.
Yes, they did.
Into the
I
script.
mean, come on.
Yeah,
can't beat that.
You know, I could totally see the issue there of improvisation getting in the way of what the story is. And, you know, there was also a Variety had ran a story that an anonymous crew member had said that basically Kathleen Kennedy was getting a little frustrated as well because this improvisation was stretching out the shooting days and they were getting behind on schedule. And, you know, Kathleen Kennedy is such a prolific producer who's made all of these incredible movies. I could see that getting on her nerves a little.
Oh, for sure.
You know, you don't want to be figuring things out on the clock. You know, there's room for improvisation, but when you're there shooting on set or location or wherever, you know, you can't spend all day trying to find something. And, you know, there was also a piece from Star Wars Newsnet, I believe, where they really said that this all started with Alden Ehrenreich, who had voiced some concerns, whether it be to Kennedy or whoever, that he was starting to worry that the screwball comedy aspect was getting in the way of the character.
Right.
And there were actually some like comparisons saying that they were turning Han Solo into this like Ace Ventura level character, which really is terrifying. It's like that Star Wars Detours thing. It's like, I can't
becomes an entirely different thing.
And so, you know, I hate that they got hired and they got all the way through, you know, they got into filming and this happened, because that's not a good look for anybody. And they had already, Lucasfilm had already had some issues with the Gareth Edwards controversy.
Right.
And this didn't help that any. But personally, I love Ron Howard Solo. I think every time I watch it, I think, is this my favorite of the Disney era? Because it nails that classic Star Wars feeling. And I love Alden's performance. I love Glover's performance. And I love the Dryden Voss character. There's just so much stuff about it that I'm into. So
absolutely.
While I'll always be curious as to what Lord Miller's movie might have looked like, I think for me personally, I'm happy with what we got. And I think Ron Howard too, you know, I mean, Ron Howard shot the script. You know, he did the movie that they wanted to make, and also he kept cinematographer Bradford Young, who was Lord Miller's pick, and so he was really concerned with the look of the movie. And I think Lord Miller's movie would have looked very similar, if nothing else, because they had already chosen Bradford Young. But just a interesting situation altogether. That
no doubt. Well, and I love too. You know, and I don't know if it was directly or was as a result of this whole situation, but there's a part of me that thinks it has to be. Like, we get Bryce Dallas Howard doing Mandalorian.
Yeah.
That's her dad. And like, her episodes of Mandalorian are really good. And like, honestly, as somebody who is of the right age, like, I love Apollo 13. That side-by-side shot of Mando and Apollo 13 and the ship and the atmosphere and the ode to her dad, like, that hit me in my feels, because as a kid who grew up an obsessed nut of the space program, and then to see Apollo 13, I was in college or whenever an Apollo 13 came out, but like, that movie is one of my all-time favorite movies. And like, the emotional weight of when they're in communications blackout on reentry and the kids away at boarding school and the clock tick, like, that whole thing still hits me today.
Yeah.
Because as a grown-up, I'm going, I know what it feels like to be by yourself, and I know what it feels like to be whatever. But like, that's her dad, and he got into Star Wars in this little mode. And so did she come hang out? Did she go, oh, I've always loved, like, I love the overlap and how we get a feed through of all that, potentially maybe because of this situation.
there's also something very awesome about the meta aspect of like fathers and sons and fathers and daughters, where you have Lawrence and Jake Kasdan working together on that movie. And then you have Bryce and Ron both working on Star Wars projects. And also I was a huge fan of Willow as a kid.
Yes, absolutely.
Loved Willow. And, I think her episode in season 1 with the village and everything feels very Willow inspired.
It's very
as well.
Willow, no doubt.
I'm excited to see. I believe she's directing an episode of Book of Boba Fett, and I think Patty Jenkins obviously is going to be the first female director of a Star Wars movie with Rogue Squadron. But I could totally see Bryce Dallas Howard doing a movie at some point. I think
I agree completely.
I think the series have been great. They're sort of incubators for getting directors ready for bigger projects, Filoni included. Moving him to live action is getting him ready for a movie at some point. And so I think Bryce Dallas Howard too could totally helm something in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And that's such a good, again, Ron Howard, we didn't know that we wanted Ron Howard, Opie, Arrested Development, all the other things that he's done to be a Star Wars, and here we are. And I'm like you, like every time I watch Solo, I'm like, I really do like this movie. Like there's no part of it like, there again, little tiny things, but like even the Imperial dude that's like, Solo, you don't, the last name thing, like I don't care.
Yeah,
like,
that doesn't bother me. Yeah.
It doesn't bother me. Like I love the performance. I love what Alden does. I mean, I love Donald Glover as Lando. Like this is the
Woody
movie.
Harrelson was so great. I just love.
Oh my God! And I've said, as a kid who grew up with Star Wars originally, grew up with the original trilogy, like Chewbacca was always fine. This is the movie that made me love Chewbacca. Like this is the movie that I went, holy crap! I like Chewbacca. Like I didn't think I liked Chewbacca before this. But the origin story, I love what Jonas does. Of course, we get a younger, athletic Chewbacca, like everything about it. So to get the Ron Howard elements of that feeding into Bryce and Mando and all that, that's just icing on the cake. So that's a great one. Controversy, but there's a lot of positives that come out of it. As we jump into number 2, we have conspiracy. And this is a great conspiracy. Jar Jar Binks as a Sith Lord. I mean, just go. Adam. That's all I can say.
So this was started by a Reddit user named Lumpawaru, if you will, on the Star Wars subreddit, and it's an extremely lengthy post. You can still find it out there. It's sort of burned into the history of Star Wars Reddit
internet.
But the user lays out why Jar Jar is potentially a Sith Lord, and some of his reasons include that his clumsiness is so over the top that it could be an act, essentially like Yoda. He's pretending to be this bumbling buffoon in order to fool everyone into recognizing that he's a powerful Force user. Of course, he infiltrated the Senate. He gave absolute power to Palpatine. One of the other interesting things is that he uses a lot of hand gestures when he talks. And by doing this, he's actually Jedi mind tricking people to change their opinion, which I just thought was hilarious. But it's just such a funny, dumb thing. And I wonder, this is one of those that I feel like it had to come out of people like they didn't like the prequels or they hated Jar Jar. I mean, we all know the backlash that existed with Jar Jar as a character. And so it almost feels like this is a way of retconning in a way the character of Jar Jar to make him this badass character that people can feel, the dude bros of Star Wars can feel cool about liking because he's such a badass now. But it's just so silly. I mean, Jar Jar to me is he'll always be an interesting character because he is clumsy and simple in a way, and is tricked by Palpatine, and he's an integral part of the fall of the Republic, and it's a sad arc for him, but also, I mean, it's a very intriguing arc for George to work in there. I know, and we'll never know. I guess we'll never know what George's ultimate plans for Jar Jar was, because I think he envisioned Jar Jar to be a much bigger part of the prequels, and then the backlash was what it was, and he sort of diminished him a little from the next two movies. But
Right.
who knows? Maybe George had this planned all along.
There's no telling, and it really is one of those things that, like, when you read it, and I've read those same threads that you mentioned, and you're just going, I see it, but at the same time, seriously, is that really what you think? Like, I mean,
it's been interesting to see, again, just like with everything, just sort of the revisionism as time goes on. People change their minds about the prequels, or the younger generation that loved them as a kid, is now defending them more, I guess. And to see the resurgence of love for Jar Jar Binks as a character, I mean, I feel like we're going to see him again. And I don't know when or where it's going to be, but I would be shocked if we don't see Jar Jar show up again.
I agree. And I feel like, I know for a fact, I definitely want that, if for no other reason than what we know, what Ahmed Best has gone through.
Exactly.
Kind of like Jake Lloyd, these people who have dealt with literally people being horrible to them for 20 years because of movies that they got hired to act in and be a part of. And Ahmed Best especially has risen above it. He's done the Jedi Challenge, whatever that thing is called. He's had the opportunity to stay a positive part of Star Wars. But there's a part of me that goes, okay, like, I wasn't a Jar Jar guy. I wasn't really a prequels guy. But, like, when that Black Series Jar Jar came out last year, whenever it was, there's a half part of me that was like, I need one. I didn't get it, but I stopped and thought about it for a hot second, because I was like, I want it because of Ahmed, and he doesn't get any pennies off that. But that same thing of the characters, and it's very George Lucas to take a character like Jar Jar and go, it's fun and it's silly and it's whatever. But all I hear is Obi-Wan when they go to Gunga City, and he says, you got kicked out for being clumsy. Like, he's asking, like, what do you mean? Like, It doesn't make sense to him, because he's a Jedi and their whole life is measured and weighed out. And there's this doofus like me, and like, most of the rest of us. And even that big battle in Phantom Menace, when he falls over and uses his ears to fling the ion ball, and you're just going, it worked out. It was fine. He's a hero, and
he does a lot of Wicket type stuff. And
as someone very Wicket,
as someone who likes the Ewoks, I never really had a issue too much with.
There's no reason to have an issue with that. So
I agree.
That's a great number 2. It's a wild one, and we're gonna go right now to number 1. And number 1, and I feel like I have to tell people to gird their loins, because this is the Route 1 agent number 1, whatever it is, for Star Wars nonsense on the internet. Kathy Kennedy, all things Kathy Kennedy. I mean, I will say, for a second, I was going to do a picture of Kathy Kennedy with laser eyes, because that was the thing that seemed appropriate.
That's what you always see on every YouTube
That's
video.
right. But also Kathy Kennedy getting awards because Kathy Kennedy is kind of a badass also makes sense. So tell us a little bit about your choice of Kathy Kennedy number 1. I get it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So just to begin, let me say that Kathleen Kennedy has participated in the making of 60 films.
Every great movie you've ever loved.
And these movies have earned over $11 billion worldwide, and including 5. She has 5 of the 50 highest grossing films of all time under her belt. She has received 8 Academy Awards for Best Picture nominations, which is the 3rd greatest number of any nomination, behind, I think, Spielberg and Scott Rudin. So pretty high up there. As a producer, she's 3rd behind Kevin Feige and Spielberg in terms of domestic box office, which is somewhere over $7.5 billion. And if you look at her reign, and just in terms of being Lucasfilm's president, The Force Awakens made $2 billion. The Last Jedi made $1.3 billion. The Rise of Skywalker made $1 billion. Rogue One made $1 billion. Disney acquired Lucasfilm for $4 billion. So single-handedly, she's already made that money back.
That was a great investment.
Yeah. And, yes, Solo only made close to $400 million. There's a lot of factors that go into that. I think, like mentioning just the controversy in itself, people were sort of down on Lucasfilm at that point. And also The Last Jedi really divided the fan base in ways that I don't think Lucasfilm was expecting. I mean, if you remember whether you love it or hate it, Last Jedi, when it came out, Kathleen Kennedy was like so excited about it. And she just praised Rian Johnson, like how great it was to work with him and how it was like such an easy experience. And even on Rian Johnson's side, it's like they finished early. Like they shot the movie and finished early, and it was like in the can 2 months before like they even had to get it turned in or something. So they went from this very divisive experience where people were actually like, well, I'm done with Star Wars forever, I'm going to boycott it. And so all of these factors came into Solo, and was the market there for Solo? Did people feel like there needed to be a Solo movie? I mean, that's a lot of questions that are still out there, but I think we can all agree that Solo might have done infinitely better as a Disney Plus series, but it is what it is. So anyway, she's made billions and billions of dollars, and then to also be at the head of the company during the sort of the migration to Disney Plus and introducing the Mandalorian, which I mean, to me, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I would think the Mandalorian is single-handedly maybe one of the most popular Star Wars things to come out in years. I mean, it turned people that weren't necessarily into Star Wars into they just had to see what Baby Yoda was all about. And I think it might have even not only did it change, it took a group of the audience that wasn't necessarily into Star Wars and made them casual fans. It also took a lot of casual fans and maybe pushed them into the more diehard category. Because I think once they experienced a Star Wars story outside of the films, that might have turned them on to the animated series and stuff like that. And so, I mean, her impact on filmmaking in general and in Star Wars is undeniable to me. And you can totally not agree with all of her decisions if you want, but I think the like hatred and the like spite that comes out of a lot of these fan theories that she's going to get fired, or George Lucas like personally hates her, or they're going to redo the sequel trilogy. It's just all complete nonsense. And going back to what we were talking about with Super Shadow, Mike Zero, Grace Randolph, Star Wars Theory, any of these people that have videos that are essentially just attacks on Kathleen Kennedy, I mean, they have zero integrity. I mean, that shows that they are not connected at all to reality or the real world. And back in March, I believe, they did a shareholders meeting, and Bob Chapek, the new CEO, basically said that someone actually asked during that, they did a Q&A during that call, and someone actually was brazen enough to ask, are you going to fire Kathleen Kennedy?
Correct.
Which I just think is hilarious.
Yeah.
Like who did that? And Bob Chapek said, we're thrilled with what Kathy's done, and we look forward to her continuing to run Lucasfilm for years to come. So certainly didn't seem like there was any issue there. Now, Kathleen Kennedy's contract does run out in October of this year. Her contract was going to run out in 2018, and then they extended it for 3 years, and now it ends in October.
That's
so,
right.
I mean, is it possible?
Which is also very normal for contracts and
absolutely
the way those things work.
It's not a situation like it was with George. George was the owner of Star Wars. No one else was going to touch it.
It was a different thing.
He sold it, and now it's in a system where it will touch many hands as years go on. And that's just a natural thing. And Kathleen Kennedy, she may or may not renew her contract, but it will have absolutely nothing to do with her performance or anything like that. If anything, I could see her not wanting to renew the contract because of the way these dipshits act. But outside of that,
well, and that's what I want to kind of bring. Part of my point too, and I didn't realize this, I was looking it up as you were talking. She does have, and I went all the way back to 1984. She does have an actress credit, uncredited as a dancer in Anything Goes in Temple of Doom.
That's right.
Which is fun. But if we go beyond that, producer, I'm just going to work from 82 forward, because it's not just Star Wars. Like, if you had anybody with this kind of record, E.T., Poltergeist, Twilight Zone, the movie, Temple of Doom, Gremlins, Fandango, Goonies, Back to the Future. I don't know if you've heard of that. Young Sherlock Holmes, Color Purple, Money Pit, American Tail, Inner Space, Empire of the Sun, Batteries Not Included, China Odyssey, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Land Before Time, Tummy Trouble. Okay, fine, whatever. Dad, Back to the Future 2, Always, Mel Gibson movie, Joe versus the Volcano, Back to the Future 3, Gremlins 2, New Batch, Arachnophobia, weird ass movie, Cape Fear, Curly Sue, also Bruce Willis, Brief History of Time, American Table, Five Goes West, Hook, Wish for Things That Work, Toon Adventures, Noises Off. Hold on, let's keep going. Alive. Anybody hear about a plane crash and people eating each other? That's Kathy Kennedy. Jurassic Park. We're Back, a Dinosaur Story. A Little Thing We Call Schindler's List. Flintstones, Milk Money, Bridges of Madison County. All your grandparents love that movie. Congo, Indian in the Cupboard. Darth Vader in Indian in the Cupboard. Balto, Twister, Jurassic Park, The Lost World. Sixth Sense, Snow Falling on Cedars. Let's keep going. AI, Will Smith, Jurassic Park 3, Signs, Seabiscuit, Black Stallion, War of the Worlds, Munich, Diving Bell and the Butterfly, very critically acclaimed. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. You know what? People don't like it. It's a pretty good Indiana Jones movie. I'm just saying.
I agree.
Benjamin Button, Special Relationship, Last Airbender, Hereafter. Here we go. Warhorse, Lincoln, pretty big movie. Episode 7, Force Awakens, BFG, Girl on the Train, Rogue One, Last Jedi, Solo, Star Wars Story, Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, Mandalorian, Disney Gallery. How do you argue with that? What is a resume that you can tell me, like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense.
You know, and George specifically wanted her to be the president of the company. That was part of the deal in selling it. And I think that was a smart move. And I think she's more than accomplished what she set out to do. If she wanted to move on and do something else, I think she's more than entitled to do that. I don't expect her to stay with Lucasfilm forever, but I think it's going to be her choice. I don't think anyone's going to, kick her out or anything.
Right.
It's just, and it's like we were saying a little earlier, I get some criticisms where people want a little more consistency, or they don't think she's done a good job as far as the creative direction of Star Wars or what have you. But again, not fully her job as the president. She's not Kevin. Her job seems a little different than Kevin Feige in Marvel. Kevin Feige is much more grounded into the creative process and connecting all these films together. Whereas I feel like, as a businesswoman, as a producer, Kathleen Kennedy is fantastic where she is. But I totally think that if we brought Favreau and Filoni up below her, and more or less they have, as they've become executive producers and creatives in that capacity, I think that trio is kind of unbeatable. Going back to that, talking about collaboration and people with those three skill sets working together, I think, The Mandalorian has been some of the best Star Wars we've seen. So I do not think Kathleen is worried at all about her position. And I don't think
I don't think she is either. So. And I even love, there's a part of Kathy Kennedy that I love because, of course, like, she's a businesswoman and she recognizes what works, what doesn't. Let's do this. Let's do that. As I was searching for different images, and like I said, I love this one of her getting awards and, just kind of that whole, fanboy tears as we deal with in, some of these Star Wars circles. But there's I think it was when she was on the cover of the Hollywood Reporter, and when she's on the cover of that magazine, the little, blurb on the front of it, she says, I don't analyze things, I just do them. And like, she's one of these ones that goes, I don't spend a lot of time losing sleep going, are people going to like it? Are they like, I go, this is Goonies, it's going to work. This is Star Wars, it's going to work. Like, she has an instinct, and and again, based on that resume that we've seen, tell me where she's wrong. Like, sure, there's some things that don't completely work, but like, if any of us had a record like that at work, we'd be riding high. Like, we'd be fine.
Right. Yeah. Especially when you compare it to, a company like a studio like Warner Brothers right now, who Warner Brothers really, to me, is just struggling across the board to
For sure.
find consistency, not only in their DC, the DC superhero thing is all over the place, whether you like Zack Snyder stuff or not.
Right.
I mean, that whole side of their business is really fractured, and they're still trying to figure out, how do we make this work? And then you look on the other side of what, they've done with the Harry Potter franchise, which, the Fantastic Beasts movies they're certainly not the Harry Potter movies, and they already feel like they've worn themselves pretty thin. And I would much rather have someone like Kathleen Kennedy at the helm than a situation like some of these other studios are encountering right now. So
no doubt.
Yeah.
She has the resume. She has the history. She's been in this since the 80s. Like, this is what she's been doing. And whether dude bros like it or not, that's their problem. And that's what, I love that. And I guess this brings me back to kind of wrapping us up, which is, as an entertainment journalist, as somebody like you who covers these stories, has moments to go, yeah, here's a thing that's being reported, but guess what? It's crazy talk. It's not real. It's not whatever.
Right.
I love that Star Wars fans overall are going to take the moment to recognize, look at all the things she's done. Look at what look at how successful it's been. Like you said, Disney bought Lucasfilm for $4 billion. They've easily made 3, 4, 5 times that, if not more, at this point. From the movies, the series,
merchandising.
That's not an investment that people are going, gosh, I can't believe we did this, and what a mistake we made. Like, it's successful. And it's also successful because we've seen everything else that's coming ahead of us. The golden era that we've talked about. Like, we've got 5, 6, 7 TV shows. We've got 3, 4, 5 movies. Like, we have all these things in front of us. That doesn't come from someplace where it's a failure and this woman has ruined it for everybody. Like, that's crazy talk. Like, what are we doing here?
And I think it's so funny too, the way that these people kind of bend things around. Like, Luke showing up at the end of season 2 of Mandalorian, right? Like, for me, as someone who loves Luke Skywalker and wants to see more of him in that era, I was like so incredibly delighted to see that. And then I was a little furious to see idiots on the internet taking that as a way of like this is to get back at Rian Johnson for what he did to Luke. And I'm like, no, it's idiot. Not. Like, no, it's not.
It's because the thing that makes the most sense. This is the prime of Luke Skywalker. This is Luke Skywalker trying to rebuild the Jedi Order. Of course, he's out looking for people like Grogu or whoever the hell else is Force sensitive that he can go help and reach out to. Like, that's what we get.
Yeah, and it was the same thing with like the Rise of Skywalker, where Luke showed up again and he caught the lightsaber. And to me, that was a great moment because it was further development of the Luke we saw in The Last Jedi, who realized he was wrong.
Correct.
That he can be this symbol of hope. And so him catching that lightsaber to me was the full recognition of the arc that he had just went through. Whereas other people read that scene as like, this is what The Last Jedi should have been. This is righting the wrongs of what Rian Johnson did. Or people were upset that it was it conflicted with The Last Jedi in some way. And I don't understand that reading at all. To me, it seemed like the Luke we see at the end of The Last Jedi is this Luke. You know what I mean? He's grown. He's learned something. So it's, everybody's got a different way of reading the movies. And some people you just can't argue with.
That's right.
I
Well,
don't bother with it anymore anyway.
If there's a lesson that we can learn from Twitter and the internet is there's some people you just can't argue with, for sure.
And like you're saying earlier, if you don't like it, fine. There's going to be something else you will like. Go find that and talk about it, and don't worry about it.
We don't have to light our couch on fire because we don't like this one thing. We can light our couch on fire for the next thing, whatever. Yes. Well, Adam, this has been so fun for me, and I've kept you way longer than I intended to, but this has been such a fun conversation, and I love your top 7 list. Let's do this as we wrap up, and I'm going to get it up on the screen, but tell us what you've got coming up. I do have, y'all can follow Adam on Twitter. He is at Adam Frazier with an IER, as opposed to ZER. That's important to know. Otherwise you won't find him. But what else do you have going on that people can be looking for?
Yeah, so I write a weekly Star Wars column for Slashfilm called Star Wars Bits, and that comes out every Friday. And I do theatrical reviews for geeksadune.com.
Excellent. Well, we want everybody to check that out. All of those links will be in the show notes if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast. If you haven't watched the video version, we would love for you to come check it out. There are some visual elements, but we try to make it accessible for both our audio listeners and our video watchers. So thank you all so much for hanging out with us tonight. Thank you for everybody that was in the live chat. And I can't thank Adam enough for taking time on his Sunday night to be with us. We really appreciate it. And for everybody else that is hanging out, we look forward to seeing you again next time. So until we are together again, may the Force be with you always.